My name is Monk Rowe. I'm very pleased to have Paul Shaffer with me this morning for the Phileas Jazz Archive. It's 11 a.m. ish, and that's about the time most musicians get their mojo working. Thanks for joining me.
Yes, I cannot verify that my mojo is in fact working. However, if it is, I certainly hope that it will work on you.
All right. I wanted to tell you about a little research I did recently, sort of unscientific, but I've determined that in the United States, there's approximately 3,200 keyboard players who are somewhere between modestly envious or insanely jealous of Paul Shaffer's career and accomplishments.
Well, I don't, I'm sure you're right because it's just been, uh, I've been so blessed. It's all I can say. And talk about right place at the right time. Um, I was. It's all I can say.
You and I are similar age, and when I think back about the music and high school and so forth, I remember how I was. So I'm going to take a shot here. And can you describe yourself at 15?
15 years old. Um, so I'm just trying to place what year I might have been in high school, some point in high school, 10th grade or something.
Yeah, 10th or 11th grade.
Yeah, well, I think I was already starting to play. Yeah, at 15, I was starting to play. I joined the Musicians Union. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Even up in Thunder Bay, Ontario, which at that time it was two towns in northern Ontario, Fort William, Port Arthur. Me being from the Fort William part, and they amalgamated in 1967, became Thunder Bay. But in Fort William, we had a branch of a local of the AF of M up there. I can't remember the number of the local now. I should be ashamed of myself. But I sure remember the secretary, Rocky Albertini. And you went, I was thinking about this today because I'm going to up to Toronto to see this guy, a gentleman named Rick Lazar. I've known him since these days we're talking about when I was 15. I used to play the piano in school assemblies, kind of out. I don't know if that's how I got started, but certainly, from elementary school, might be called upon to do it. And I would play a piece from my music lesson normally all through elementary school. But by somewhere in what we call middle school here now, up there it was a junior high, grade 7 or 8. I just made a decision. Instead of playing a little piece by Mozart this time, I'm going to play Pipeline by the Chantays. I had learned how to do all that on the piano.
No kidding. You had the down in your left hand and all that.
Yeah, pretty easy to play. It's a little Mozartian if you think about it. Down, 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 down. And but I was just playing a piano bliss, I guess. But man, it was close enough, and it was sensation. And that may have been where I said, you know what, you don't have to write your own material at all. Just do this. I kind of brought the house down because it was just so almost rebellious in nature. I don't know. It represented so many things. And from that point on, and then in high school, I would do that, especially when the Beatles came out. And I was not one of these people we hear so many times. When I had a little interview show a while ago, all these musicians, great respected guys, said the same thing. When I saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, that made me want to go. Well, that wasn't the case with me. I was already digging earlier acts on Sullivan, and they were so much more special to me up in Canada. But like when I saw the Four Seasons, that was, I barely noticed the Beatles. I was still reeling from the Four Seasons.
Did
So
you?
I'd play a Beatles tune nonetheless. They went over a little better than Don't Go Away by the Four Seasons. And this guy, Rick Lazar, older, 1 year more advanced than I, was more of a musical cat, very hip, even at great. So hip, his sax, tenor sax, always smelled of cigarette smoke. That's all I can tell you. And he caught me in one of these assemblies and said, let's get together. And I ended up joining the band that he was in, and that's a long way around what I was going to. So that kind of became my salvation up there. Otherwise, I was a very, nebbishy kid.
I was going to ask if you negotiated the sometimes intense social atmosphere in high school because you had this persona. You weren't a jock, or you weren't, I don't know, you might have been a straight A student, but you had the music thing. Did that help you become?
Sure. I guess certainly it did. If you're thinking back to high school days and stuff. But being in a band, as it were, wasn't quite the same up in Fort William, Ontario. First of all,
Describe a gig for me up there.
well, the gigs we were playing, I was 15 going into 16 and stayed in this band through, until I graduated and left town to go to college. Gig, we might be playing, we would play the school dances. That's really what we did. And then we had a regular Saturday night gig at the Fort William Gardens, a hockey arena, where they would put plywood down on the ice and erect a stage. And that's what we would play on, a stage of about, I don't know, 6 feet high, 6, 7 feet high, hockey arena, booming sound. No such thing as stage monitors at that time. No such thing as roadies. That's the main thing, because at the end of the gig, and I had my own amplifier and small combo organ, and I would be loading it into my parents' car at the end of the night, and it wasn't so glamorous as all of that. Didn't help.
Do you remember what kind of bread were you making on the average hockey rink gig?
$24 perhaps a night. That was scale. Rocky Albertini specified.
So it was actually a union.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's why I had to join. I guess that's what sparked me thinking about Ricky Lazar. I joined his band. It was a union band. I had to join the union right away. Go down to see Rocky Albertini in the back of his shoe store. And he signed me up, and I had to promise him, don't be giving away too many of those appearances in the assemblies. I want to know about them when they ask you to play at the school. I want to be able to okay them or not. So I had to call Rocky Albertini. Yes, indeed. And then eventually, both of us forgot about it. But yes, that's how I started out. Absolutely a union man, which I have been all these years.
There's a nice anecdote,
and that was the scale.
Yeah, there's a nice anecdote about I'm sorry, about you going to see Nat King Cole in Las Vegas.
Okay. Well, my parents were, my father, a lawyer in this town of Thunder Bay, doing all kinds of law, specialist in civil litigation, but he would do a will or accident case, or even a criminal, whatever was going on. My mother, a lovely housewife, both of them very musical and totally interested in show business. And to talk about that Ed Sullivan show, it was a lifeline, because besides the teenage acts that he presented, Ed had everybody that was anybody in show business, and he made stars at that time, and we could see it on Canadian television. The CBC carried the Ed Sullivan Show. So that was Sunday night was, family night around the TV. Everyone in the business talks about it so nostalgically. Of course, it wouldn't happen today. But Ed had something for everybody, whether it be all the old comics that I also became familiar with, the Shecky Greens, the Myron Cohens, and all of them.
Topo Gigio.
Yeah, the little Italian mouse. You see how? Who can forget this? Senor Wences, a different guy, but he had this thing, and boy, that was so. It left an impact, and my parents they were very interested in Las Vegas, hearing about it all. So many of these performers on television and on the talk shows. Johnny Carson was our only talk show host at that time. We finally got cable TV from Duluth, Minnesota, and were able to see Johnny Carson. And then, Las Vegas, everybody seemed to be talking about it, especially Sinatra, my parents' favorite. Although my dad did turn me on to Ray Charles, I must say, pretty hip for a lawyer in Northern Ontario. And then they took me as a 12-year-old kid to Las Vegas for a trip, but they didn't gamble at all. Barely put a quarter in the machine. Just wanted to see the shows. And they took me to all the shows that they could. I was a kid of 12, so I couldn't get into some of the shows that they went to, but dinner shows, they had something called the dinner show at that time. And if there was anything risque about, this show, the dinner show would be much milder in comparison. Kids were allowed to go because they served dinner, a technicality. And that's how I got to see Nat Cole with my parents. They took me to see him at the Flamingo. I'll never forget it.
It's an obvious question because of his musicianship, but I'm wondering if there was something beyond that also caught your attention.
Musicianship front and center. And he was on piano, which he played quite extensively during the show. This is a main room show in Las Vegas. Spectacular lighting. Somehow impressed me as a kid, but because his Vegas show was such that each song was like a vignette. And I remember he did Miss Otis Regrets. I'd never heard the song before, but it stuck with me. I know it now. And he was under kind of a street lamp with a, Sinatra-esque raincoat over his shoulder, singing Miss Otis Regrets. She's unable to lunch today. So elegant. And that made an impression on me. And then what he said, some of the dialogue I even remember word for word, because he had a hit at the time on the rock and roll radio, Rambling Rose.
Rambling Rose, yes.
Why you ramble, heaven knows. I knew the song very well. And his show, however, was more jazz than contemporary music. This would have been around 62 when we were there, and so who knows how he felt about Ramblin' Rose? I don't know. He sure sang the hell out of it. But when it was time for that, he spoke to the audience and he said, ladies and gentlemen, at this time in the show, a performer like myself would normally play what is currently and commonly referred to as his hit record. But in some circles, that would be referred to as milking the audience, and you people have already been milked enough at the tables. And even as a 12-year-old, I said, I better get this down word for word.
Yeah, you've got to get a shtick. Man, that's great. And I also read something about you playing for your parents in a go-go dance apparently in the living room.
Yes.
And
I guess I read about I wrote about this, I guess, in my book. And thank you. It sounds like you researched it a little bit.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, that was the kind of nutty parents I had. Oh, we want to have a go-go party, and can you get us a go-go girl? We'll get a stage, kind of, a table that we can use for a stage, and we want you to play piano all night and, book a go-go girl for us. Somehow I was able to do that.
That's a
Uh,
lot of repertoire for a night. Can did it come from 60s AM radio?
their knowledge of go-go and such. Is
Yes.
that what you're? Well, I think they were more interested in the side of it. They might have read about Richard Burton's first wife, Sybil, who had a famous disco in New York called Arthur and the Society Crowd. And they subscribed to the New Yorker. My parents up in Thunder Bay, they probably read more about Sybil and maybe the Peppermint Lounge, how they, the society matrons were going there and twisting the night away and stuff. And that was what I more. And the Go-Go Girls and stuff. They would have read about it more as a style thing. I was, of course, listening to AM radio, and I could pick it up American radio after dark by this quirky thing that everybody has a different explanation for it. Whether it be the Great Lakes carried it up or the satellite bouncing off, I don't know. 50,000 watts of WLSAM, though, did reach me up there after dark, and I could hear the Chicagoland DJs and stuff, and that was very influential too. So this was like me, a nebbish of a kid, if you will. But I had, I could hear WLS at night, and so I knew what the top 3 songs were in Chicagoland. And I was sort of felt connected in that way.
Did you start to notice arrangements, the particular sound of a record and what gave it some distinction from the person behind that we rarely hear about, the cat that arranged the horns and chose we're going to put a harpsichord in here and all that? Did that seek into your consciousness?
I don't think it did until much later. I was hearing the records on the radio and zeroing in on them and certainly learning the arrangements because I was reproducing them on piano as a kid. Instead of practicing my piano lesson, I'd start to hear these simple songs on the radio and find that I could play them all with just 3 and 4 chords. Once I learned, just like a guitar playing kid of today, I learned those 4 chords. And then I would also play the melody in my right hand. Very simple, but if I heard an orchestration line, for instance, Gene Pitney, I remember had a record that I loved called Mecca. I do a Louis side. And it had some oboe, like a Middle Eastern type of would come in, and I would learn how to play that. And I'd really be reproducing the orchestration too. And that was kind of also what I did a lot of as a kid and expanded my hearing and my hearing of chords that way. Oh, there's a 5th chord. What's that? And it was as simple as that, though, pretty easy to learn it step by step because the music was just getting a little more sophisticated at a time. And then I guess really it wasn't until college when Blood, Sweat, and Tears hit, and they were very influential for me. And the first album.
Me too. I wanted to be Fred Lipsius.
Yes, and I just made an album with him last week.
Oh, no kidding.
Spent all day, and yes, he's been, not that I know him, but I know him now. He's been, you may know, a professor at Berkeley all these years since then, except he retired maybe 4 years ago. But still got it, and lots of stories you can possibly imagine. But that started to hit me all of a sudden, this horns in rock and roll and how they opened up the stricture, the narrow strictures of rock and roll. which were just you couldn't play more than 4 chords, or we don't want to hear from you. And you certainly couldn't play a jazz solo like Lou Soloff did in Spinning Wheel, And all of a sudden, I started to see the arranger credited. It was Lipschitz, or the other, or Dick Callaghan.
Callaghan, yeah.
And then I started to become a little more conscious of it. It took that. It really did take that, because I was just flying blind. In no way did I think I would ever become an arranger, or a guy who, can even call an arranger, or, at all. I went to college to study philosophy and sociology, which is what you take when you don't know what you're going to do. But first weekend I was in Toronto for college, a nightclub opened, a rock club. And sure enough, BS&T with their Canadian singer, David Clayton Thomas. And I was at all 4 shows, just taking mental notes, concentrating a little more on getting to see finally such world-class entertainment as that. From Thunder Bay, where, I did open for the Trogs with my band, but otherwise we didn't play for, we didn't see too many of those kind of world-class.
Did the Trogs do the potato solo live?
Absolutely. That's the sweet potato instrument you're talking about. And the formal name is ocarina, of course.
Yes.
And it's one of those solos that I knew, I knew note for note and could reproduce for you even today.
So you were getting this amazing training for what you ended up doing in your career. Did at some point when you were in college, did you decide, I think I need to be a musician? I think I
yes.
need, yes.
And it was so clear because, I had this outlet. I had this band, Ricky and the Fugitives. They were called the Fugitives, and I joined them. It's already a band that went back to, they were a sax instrumental band and played Johnny and the Hurricanes type material, Red River Rock. And Ricky could, on that stinky tenor of his, play the flutter tongue style of that period. And then they started singing when the Beatles, hit. And then they had to hire they hired a keyboard player. They expanded their sound. Well, I got carried away with my own boredom. What would you ask again?
I think I was going towards some of the things you've said sounded like it seemed an inevitable.
Oh yes, how did I? Well, in college I was so bored. I gave up the band. I no longer was a member of the Fugitives or had any outlet to perform in any way, and I was trying to be a sociologist or something, and I got really depressed. So depressed that I had to sleep all the time. Nowadays, imagine they'd be, Epstein, you have Epstein-Barr syndrome, whatever it was. I just knew that if I had a class at 9 a.m. but till 10, by 10:15, I was back in bed in the dorm. Could not, so sad. And then, I don't know if we have time. And my old boss would say, "Do we have to cut away? We have to."
I got time if you do.
Have to do a commercial. All right. Well, because this is where, the moment where I realized something had to change. First of all, I didn't really go home for the summer after my first year at University of Toronto, because there was this, music happening in Toronto. I just had to stay. And I told my parents, of course I visited them beginning and the end of the summer. But in the middle, I said, I'd like to stay in Toronto and take a course in arranging. It was really that blood, sweat, and tears, influence hipping me to the whole concept of arranging. I'd like to take a course, and I knew I could sell them on this. just that word course. They were going to go for it, and they did. They allowed me to stay in Toronto. It was very easy for me to get a job there in a bar band, live music in bars, which we had, you know, kind of the tail end of that scene that the Robbie Robertson and the band came out of. I did that for the summer with some older guys, and it's lucky I did take that course in arranging. It's the only real training I had in, you know, in arranging. Um, but and it worked, you know, it paid off. I certainly used it later on. I knew how to write a chart and did a little bit, even up in Toronto. Um, so I, you know, I may have been at some all night jam session or something, but coming home at late, about 6 a.m., walking through the Toronto had its own Greenwich Village kind of place called Yorkville Village, and I walk by a guy 6 a.m. sitting on a stoop in front of a little deli, grocery store kind of place, playing acoustic guitar. And I walked by him, and then my ear caught what he was doing. I never heard anything like. I came right back, and I listened to him for a while. And he was a sort of you know, we were all hippie style looking guys at the time. He was a little Latin looking to me. And I said, "What are you doing? What the hell is that?" And he said, "Well, what, you know, are you a player?" I said, "Well, I play a little piano, but I don't know anything about what you're doing. And it's just so intriguing." He said, "Well, is there a piano?" I said, "Well, over at the dorm, you know, it's a practice room." We went over there, but now it's 8 a.m. And he starts to show me some things that really opened me up, my ears up. Starting me, you know, with standards, things that I knew through my parents and their love of music and jazz and stuff, but I couldn't hear those kind of voicings at all. He immediately showed me a few things that, you know, that started opening those things up to me. And then I started playing with him and apprenticing with him. And second year of college, I was now playing on the side with this guy who name was Michael Munoz. Turns out he was an American. He's from Brooklyn, kind of a street guy who played congas and percussion in the street, and then had been in the Army band, kind of U.S. Army. He became, you know, he ran into a bunch of open-minded musicians there, all of them in the Army, and he became a guitarist of this type that I'd never seen before or since, really, because he doesn't play any chords or harmonies or anything. He treats his guitar as if it were a saxophone and he were John Coltrane. And I'm still playing with him today because he and I have both, you know, I came to the U.S., he returned to the U.S. after some time in Toronto, and we hooked up again here. And I'm right in the middle now of doing a record with him now. He's still so originally, he now uses a spiritualistic type of first name, Tsiji Munoz, but the Munoz is still there. He can be heard on YouTube and stuff, and this record we're making together pretty soon. Still, you know, the most open kind of guy. And after he started me on standards in that little practice room at the dorm, then he said, "Okay, now we're not going to play changes at all anymore. Just one chord. Let's go." And he started training me in how to kind of accompany him in sort of Coltrane-esque explorations. And he was kind of strict too, this guy. He trained me how to really listen to him, play what he's indicating. If I spaced, he could tell immediately, and I would hear it, that's frustration. Just I'd hope to hit the opens. And I knew, you know, I try to avoid that at all costs. That sound. So that was the kind of training that I got from this guy. And when I started to play with him in the second year, I cheered up and I didn't have to sleep anymore. And it was just clear what I had to do.
What a fortuitous 6 a.m. walk for you.
Yeah.
And something you pointed out, that you were an apprentice, and that idea of having a mentor is not around as much as it used to be. So it's fortunate that that happened for you.
It sure is. And he continues to be a mentor, this guy. Fascinated by him. Now, this latest record that we just recorded, and we're kind of dealing with now at the stage of now, how do we finish it exactly? But he's at the point now where we got two great musicians. He said to me, get me, instead of the guys I normally play with, who do you think I should play with? And so I got the great Will Calhoun on drums, who you may know from playing with the group now whose name escapes me.
Living Color.
What?
Living Color.
Yes, Living Color, spelt the Canadian way, Colour.
Mm-hmm.
Will Calhoun on drums, and he said, you got to get Jamaluddin Takuma on bass, whom I was already familiar with. These two guys, Tsiji and myself, and Tsiji there's no tunes anymore or no even discussion. He just starts to play, and we start to play, and that's how this album was done.
Wow. Did it seem obvious that you needed to go to the United States eventually?
Well, yes. It seemed like a fantasy, though. Very difficult, I was aware, to do to get the kind of credentials you needed to work legally in the U.S. as a Canadian. But it wasn't like it is today. Certainly, we look at today's musical artists and we see that some of the absolute top tier musicians and performers are Canadians. Drake, need I say more? Mm-hmm. And The Weeknd, both Torontonians. Wasn't like that, Celine Dion, my goodness. When we look at some of the huge, impactful artists, in my day, we had Lightfoot, Gordon Lightfoot, the Guess Who.
Joni Mitchell.
Yes, thank you. Certainly Joni Mitchell, yes. But she had her impact after she moved to Los Angeles. And that, I would never have done it on my own, come to the US. I certainly didn't come here and say, here I am, how do I get started? Again, it was just a series of crazy, fortuitous, right place at the right time things. And here, that brought me here.
I was trying to come up with my own description of Paul Shaffer if someone asked me, and I didn't really do it except that sort of a phrase like, whatever comes up, I can do it, or I will learn to do it.
Well, to varying degrees of success, of course. But certainly we learn that in show business. If somebody asks you if you can do something, you say yes, and then learn how to do it. You can't always accomplish that. In my case, I took, thanks to my mother, who said that kid is going to take piano lessons when he's age 6, when he starts to learn English in school, time for him to learn music. And I did, and I didn't exactly practice. I was more concerned with practicing, the stuff I heard on the WLS by ear. But then I did start to, just on my own, realize it was related, the stuff I was learning. And then I got into a little theory. Royal Conservatory of Music in Canada is a whole standardized thing. You have to take some theory and harmony too. And I started to see it worked, and even the Beatles, of course, They may not have been able to read music, but they certainly were, they could hear this kind of stuff that I was discovering too. And I could see they were related. So I always, when I thought about going into music, I thought, well, I would be in a sort of a band, Beatlesque, in that they would probably work by ear. That's how I knew. I love pop music. I was aware that a lot of it, bands and musicians worked out by ear. I thought of more of that, but again, a crazy circumstance, and I got into theater, where they worked from the written page, and that wasn't my forte. Sight reading still can't really do it, but I can absolutely, read music, and I just need to woodshed it a little bit. And that's what I did when I got my first theatrical gig that eventually brought me to New York. I got sent the score, and I was able to, well, here I go, sit down and learn it.
Did you ever do the thing that this is something I have to do with the piano if I get that? I have to chordalize it. I have to look at what's written and say, oh, well, this is mostly a G chord here, and etc.
Yeah, I'm going to start doing that. I don't necessarily do that. I mean, I over the years, and goodness gracious, I became a studio musician in New York. And I learned how to read enough and to sight read enough to get through most days, especially if, certainly the first, the treble staff, and as much of the left hand as I could grab, and figuring out that there's going to be a bass and two other, both trombones on that. You know what? I don't have to hit, some things like that. And I will still, I hate to admit it, but I will write in the ledger lines, because that's just what I have to do. A, C, E, but at the time, it's nice to see, oh, it's E, and then bang, I have it. And that's the way I kind of learned how I could get through sessions. But really, they wanted, I think I got going in the studios because I really did love pop and rock and roll, and I was not condescending to play it. I was dying to play it. And previous generation were kind of older guys, didn't really like it. Sure, they could play it, but there's a difference in if you really love it.
Yeah.
With your own licks and stuff.
Bucky Pizzarelli said, once you, especially with the drummer, says, once you got the straight eighth note thing down, you were in. I love that.
Well, there you go. Yeah. But he, Bucky, did he know, does he know, could he play Dawn Go Away by the Four Seasons by ear? I don't think so. He wouldn't want to. I think that's my point.
I see. But he learned to, and he and his cohorts.
Bucky, of course.
Yeah.
Who played on the classic dates, of course.
Right.
Classic rock and roll dates. I'm aware of that. But yeah, so that was a great transition. But as you know, and I've learned because I kind of became kind of a freak for this stuff, but that great combination of some guys playing in straight eights, other guys still swinging, and adding a swing to these straight eight rock and roll records, and there was the magic that made people want to dance.
There's a Chuck Berry record like that it's almost like you can hear half the band doing one thing and the other half's, and you couldn't.
I think most of Chuck's stuff. Well, I think that's the prime example of it, of course. That those Chuck Berry things, that was early. That was rock and roll. Keith Richards likes to explain, it had both elements. Today, they've lost the roll. Everybody rocks in the straight eight, but the roll, to Keith anyway, refers to the swinging part of it. And, the bass player is swinging, I would say, in those, and the drummer's playing straight eights. And the piano player, Johnny Johnson, who, again, this Keith Richards, another guy who has studied this stuff, he says, well, he was the real leader of the band, Johnny Johnson. You know how I can tell? Because they were all in flat keys. They weren't in guitar keys. These great things, roll over Beethoven and stuff. It's Johnny's band, and he was definitely swinging both. He was both, you know. When he would solo,
Doing a triplet thing.
and yet getting, you know. So I'm fascinated by that now here in my older age.
Yeah.
Just what you stumbled upon.
I should fast forward a little bit. When you got into the SNL band and were there for a while, did the writers start to recognize that you would be a useful character in skits, like the Star Wars thing on the train? And how did that occur?
Well, I was sort of sizing things up and saying to myself, how can I get on camera? You know, totally was, whether I was subconscious or whether I knew what I was doing or not. That's just the kind of kid I was, kind of repressed, I guess, on the outside, but dying to break out. And well, a couple of crazy things happened. First year, no, even before, you know, my first job in town was on a Broadway show, The Magic Show. Stephen Schwartz, the Broadway composer, brought me into town because I had played Godspell for him up in Toronto. And now here I am. He moved me to New York and got me in my first visa, etc. And then and while that was happening, one of these Godspell types, actor types, got me an audition. I ended up going to Hollywood and making a TV pilot, which was unsuccessful at the time. And then SNL started. That was because various Canadians involved. I knew Howard Shore, the band leader from Toronto. After Godspell, I met him on the next show I did. I was kind of theatrical up there, dealing with music, I've written music that I never thought I would, but, you know, learning how to negotiate a chart, even if I didn't couldn't make all the notes within the bar. I certainly knew how to make the sign goes back to here, and, you know, things that are still important. And whatever the question was, it's long gone.
Well, you found yourself on camera in part of.
Oh yeah, how did I get on
part of the
camera?
script.
So I left it. They took that pilot off the shelf, and I ended up leaving SNL in the second season, going to Hollywood and making a show that played, called Year at the Top. Played, didn't get picked up, came back, got my old job back, but now I had some ammunition. I had seen this guy, Don Kirshner. He had a show at the time, Don Kirshner's Rock Concert. He emceed it in a really funny deadpan way. I'm now back in SNL, kind of participating in writing sessions. And Brian Doyle Murray, Billy's brother, had this idea. Brian Doyle Murray, a writer and a good friend of mine, because he had been in Toronto, another whole story. But he said, I got this idea, Garrett Morris, the only black guy on the cast at that time. What if he's in drag and as Tina Turner, and he sings Proud Mary, which he did a bang-up job of in high heels. But we got to explain, it's like instead of Tina Turner, he's Tina Turner, but instead of Ike, it's Mr. Mike, one of our running characters. It's Mr. Mike and Tina Turner. How can we set this up? And so the audience understands it before Garrett comes out in those heels. And I just said, well, I could do the guy, Don Kirshner, who has that show. I happen to have worked with him, you know, and I can do an impression of him. And he's great. And that's how, you know, I sneaked on the air for the first time.
Nice.
Long story.
Yeah.
Long.
But your hipness, the camera liked you.
You know, another crazy thing I did that I still can't really explain, but while I was in Hollywood doing that show, the show was kind of about rock musicians. I would play myself as a rock musician. and it would end with a musical number every episode. And for the musical number, they wanted to kind of flash me up a little bit. They said, let's get you wardrobe gal. I'll take you on Sunset Boulevard and get a pair of frames that'll work in the number, And this turned out to be where Elton John got his glasses when he was in Hollywood doing, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road era. And they said to me, would you like to see, we've got Elton's next pair. We're just waiting for him to pick them up. Would you like to see them? Of course I would. I was just such a big Elton fan, still am. And they brought me those white frames that he wore on that cover. I can't remember the album exactly. Square white glasses. And I said, well, give me a pair of those. And I started wearing them, and not only in that number, but then all the time. And when I came back to SNL, I still wore them. Elton John's glasses. They were his trademark, not mine, but I guess it was kind of an homage or something. I liked him so much that when the camera would go on the band, you'd see me with those glasses. And it kind of worked for me too. And it got me, I don't know, it just gave me a little bit of a visual persona, at least. It's really Elton John's persona, but I don't know. That's how much I liked him.
And you still do.
I sure do. And I still, wear well, he doesn't wear the shades so much, the glasses so much anymore. Mm-hmm. Now I guess he's going back to them. I didn't do the hair thing though that he did do. You got to give me credit for that.
You did a different hair thing.
Yes.
Was being live on Saturday Night Live or late night, was it nerve-wracking? Or did you get used to it?
Well, it was very exciting on SNL, how live it was. At the beginning, totally nerve-wracking. I couldn't believe it was going to happen during the rehearsals leading up to it. How complicated the production of the show was. I never seen anything like it. This studio that seemed huge at the time, and they had so many different sets, as they still do. You can see it on SNL now, and the camera pulls back. You see the studio with all the different sets that they're going to use during the half hour, all the different points. And how are they going to go from here to here? Well, the whole cameras, like a big caravan, drive down during the commercial to the other end. And I said, this is surreal, but certainly happened. And every time was pretty exciting because you don't get a second chance, period. You don't get a do-over. Nonetheless, Letterman was really more spontaneous because you could do something over. We never did, though, in the first 12 years when we were on 12:30 a.m. Never did anything. A lot of mistakes were just left in, much cheaper that way, and the audience kind of loved it. They saw when things went wrong, they loved it, and of course Dave Letterman became a pro at just reacting to anything that went wrong, and of course you wanted to leave it in. Some of us missed those days, leaving it in, because they did edit a little more as they went along.
Yeah, I was going to ask you.
Doing it 5 times a week, yeah, you do finally get used to it. Yeah. You finally.
I was going to ask if there was break glass in case of emergency type protocol, if you really had like a train wreck, but it sounds like it just spontaneously fixed itself somehow.
I had some train wrecks on in the early days for sure that I couldn't believe were on. They just went on. They just went by. Something crazy sticks in my mind, though. Paul Simon making a rare TV appearance, and he was going to sing with his acoustic guitar just on the panel with Dave. A beautiful song of his, the late great Johnny Ace. Very nostalgic and wistful, and kind of sad, sentimental. And it came to a point in the middle of it where it just came to a slowed down pause as some of Paul Simon's music does. And then would pick up again. But before it could pick up again, our assistant director, the late great Pete Fatovich, who had to keep things moving, pressed that applause button. Ding, 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 and the audience applauded dutifully. Paul wasn't finished. Well, we cut to commercial, and I'm standing there saying, wait, this is professional TV. But they just kept on. Came back, and Paul was just, well, I didn't get to finish it, but that's the way it goes.
I was able to talk to Al Ches, who was on the band for a while. And
Yeah,
yeah, he said 90% of the time you got it. When you didn't, you learned the art of, I don't know what I'm doing, but it sounds like I do.
sure. I think he sums it up beautifully there. You have to, I mean, it's very exciting to live that way on a tightrope. And it's the only way to fly on Dave Letterman's show. He was truly as spontaneous as it looked. I don't know if anybody else really is.
Hmm.
The little experience that I've had going on in some of the other guys' shows, all of which I love for various reasons, but they do seem to rehearse these things. And then a guy drops in when, let's take it from when he drops in spontaneously. No, Dave would never do that, just, I don't want to pretend. He would just, if it happens, it's happening. Well, let's shoot what's happening. No fake, false pretext of a guy is pretending to drop in and, whatever it was. And he made it that way, such that anything could happen. And no matter how prepared I was, I'm going to have to sneeze. No matter how prepared, he could change it. At the last drop of a hat, he could change the whole thing. And you just have to swing with it, of course. And don't worry about those charts. Guys, luckily I had a secret mic I could talk to the musicians.
Oh, and it was just in their ears.
Yeah, forget the charts. He's changed the whole thing. We're going to do, that's the way we would have to operate. And so it kept it a lot of fun, really.
Nobody
It never got easy. Never got easy.
When you had a guest like Renee Fleming.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of, learning on the job, was that a challenge? I think your buddy Tom Bones Malone related a story about how that occurred.
Certainly was challenging for me. Once again, when you're dealing with written page, it's not my forte. Nonetheless, I was having to run this thing, which was, and luckily Tom was not booked and was able to write the key arrangements for me that we needed. But first of all, it's Renee Fleming sings the top 10 in some way. Now, I can't quite remember whether it was special lyrics. Our writer, who shall remain nameless right now, although he did a marvelous job. But I said, in a case like Renee Fleming, let's see what songs she feels comfortable with changing the words to. And then let's, do our joke, write in our jokes after that. And this writer didn't think that was the way to go. He said, no, I have some choices here. Okay, so he actually wrote the ones that he wanted. And I then had to learn what he's done and the different, number 10 through 1, different snatches of operas, well-known operas, some more well-known to this writer than to me, I'll tell you that. But nonetheless, it's only 8 bars of each thing. And each one is hopefully a joke. That's the way the top 10 is going to be structured. And Renee said, can someone send me a tape of the phrasing so I know how to deliver these things if you're changing the lyrics? And so we did. I made her that tape. Happy to sing this stuff myself, as I would. Oh, wait, I'm getting a call. I have. I just made 3 cents from the ringtone of It's Raining Men.
I was going to ask you about that, the residuals and the royalties.
3 cents at a time. Believe me, it mounts up. It's great. Um, what were we talking about? I've gotten thrown
Talking
off.
about Renee Fleming, and you had to.
Oh yeah. And she mentioned it. She says, "I've got a tape of you singing those 10 songs in full voice," whatever that means. To me, it was just really a day's work. And but then Tom was able to take my tape and arrange it, and he did a beautiful job. And we brought in special, he asked for a bassoon, I think, and an oboe. And New York is the kind of place where you just make one call, and they're there at 10 a.m. Renee Fleming came into my dressing room. We had our little woodwind ensemble. Ches, I don't know if Ches was with us on that day or not anymore, but parts for everybody, thanks to Tom, who stayed up all night writing these things. And then Renee, making sure that she could time them right, because it's got to be, camera goes back to Dave. He says, number 7, bang, back to Renee, who's now singing it. So really, but when he's singing number 7, I'm going to be counting off the next thing. And she said, right, go ahead. She was right on top of it. And I don't know who else could have done it really besides her. So quite gratifying by the end of it, but certainly, yes, challenging. Given my shortcomings when it comes to the written page, especially. Because she could say in bar 7, Paul, what is this in bar 7,
Right.
And I just, Tom, that I've learned how to, just go to the person who knows.
I watched this morning on YouTube the scene with Sonny and Cher.
Oh yeah.
And I just couldn't help but put myself in your place, because I pictured you say, oh, they might do this song. I got to have an oboe sound for one thing.
Right.
And it seemed spontaneous, but I suspect that you were sort of prepared for it.
We were prepared for the possibility of it. Cher was pretending that she didn't want to do it, but it was a pretty good possibility. Nonetheless, our focus was on her number. She had a rock number, climbing the charts at the time, and wanted to play that. She made a rock resurgence right at this time. It may have been, I found someone, that song, to dig away the near. Could have been that one. So we did that, and we, got to have time within about 50 minutes, 50 that we have to get the mix right and stuff. And then after she left the stage, I said, let's just run through I Got You, Babe, very possibly, they probably do it. And I just happened to, I had the same 2 synthesizers, antiques really, for the whole run, because I just didn't have the time to learn something new. But I just knew I could get an oboe right out of my OBXA and a harpsichord down here on the Kurzweil, and I'm all set, and so and everybody kind of knew it too,
including the modulation, which you did very well.
Right from the record, you got to do that. Yes. But it sure was fun, that one, and I guess the last time they ever performed it together.
Yes, and it was interesting. I was happy that near the end, the camera panned over where we could see you and most of the band, and I got to watch your conducting style. You conduct with your head a lot,
right?
Your hands are busy. And
well, that's your piano conducting off Broadway style. Piano conductors are exist in the off Broadway scene. They don't have the union, and on Broadway you got to have a freestanding conductor who gets double scale or whatever. But off Broadway, because your budgets are more limited, and that's even before the Magic Show, I did one off Broadway show for Joe Papp, 1973, and you're piano conducting. So if you've got one hand free, you can conduct with the other hand, but sometimes it's got to be head, and certainly, yes. And also, in this case, I'm watching them too. We haven't run it with them after all. We ran it once with the band. So I don't know when are they going to want it to stop. I'm just making sure, yes, bang, and then you have that going too. It's tremendously exciting when I look back on it. It really was.
Yes. And when it finally got to the end, you looked at at the drummer, I guess it was Anton.
Yeah.
And you went like this.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, and so he did. He gave,
Some of that, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it had really not been rehearsed,
It's great.
When we rehearsed it, I certainly didn't rehearse an ending. I don't know what'll happen. Just watch me.
Yeah.
And then dang, audience is in. And that was another thing about Dave. When it was 5 o'clock or something, and the show tape's going to roll right at 5:30, the audience load in starts at 5. If I'm not finished with my Paul, clear the stage, we've got to go. I said, I just need another, get off. That's the way it was. So it also made it tremendously exciting. Sometimes we didn't have time even to learn the ending or something of a song, and would go on in that position too. Crazy. You get used to it on a daily basis.
Did you have to audition for your the role in Spinal Tap?
No, Harry Shearer got me that role and just sold me to the other guys.
Mm-hmm.
Because we had been on the 5th year of SNL together, both of us having offices near each other and collaborated on some musical things. And we're friends to this day. And he just said, Paul, this guy is funny and you should use him in this part, the local promo man. And they said, okay, Rob brought, and they all knew me to varying degrees. Chris, more so, Chris Guest, he and I did early National Lampoon songs together, 74.
Did the scene take a lot of time to film?
Oh, well, I did 2 days work on this film. Some of my key scene really was cut from the film, and it wasn't really my fault. It was because another scene didn't work out, and this scene depended on it. Luckily, on the DVD, you can see it as a bonus scene, but they just sort of made an effort to leave me in as much as they could once they had cut my key scene. But between all my various scenes, and one was in a record store that they did leave in, the in-store signing, and then some remnants of the night before where I have to talk them into going to a radio station, and then we had to cut the radio station. That kind of 2 days work on the film, all different, no written lines though. I said to Harry when he told me about it, and I said, so you'll send me my lines then? And he said, you'll be making them up. And he meant it. There were scene outlines, but no dialogue written. So in my case, just coming out for 2 days, I had to learn the various names of the characters and a lot of the backstories too. What's the president of the label, Sir Ian, and the different names that I would have to quote, sometimes.
Did you guys get that from Ahmet Erdogan from Atlantic Records? Did you think that was like an appropriate?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure where they got Sir Ian.
Sir Ian. Okay, I misunderstood.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I said, Sir Ian. Yeah.
Yeah.
They had a British guy. I think Tony Hendra, who was a British actor himself. Played Sir Ian, whomever, and wherever they could, they like to get real British accents in.
I see.
Right.
Weren't you begging them to kick you in the butt?
That's right. Now, Kick My Ass was my key scene in that in-store, the in-store record. A promo man. I was a promo man who set up an in-store, but no one came.
Yeah.
And not only that, the records were all black, the covers. You couldn't see black felt markers to sign them. Everything went wrong. And this guy has a meltdown, the promo man, and apparently it was based on a real promo man. When these Spinal Tap members once had a comedy record out, they had a promo man who did this, had a meltdown and said, "Kick my ass, it's my fault." And so I knew, this scene, when we get to the end of it, that's where it has to go.
You've been very generous with your time, Paul, and I wanted to mention just a couple things in wrapping up. First of all, I wanted to thank you for one of your world's most dangerous band recordings, because you chose "Cast Your Fate to the Wind" and "Yeah, Yeah."
Yeah. Well, they're right in my, you and I obviously same reference points.
Yes. I can remember, this is not that uncommon, but sometimes you hear the tunes, the cover versions of tunes first. When I heard "Cast Your Fate to the Wind," it was some nameless thing, like some nameless orchestra covering it. And so I always thought that was it. So,
well, I think, if I may, because I remember this and was alive then. This is way before your time. But whatever it was, 60, 64 maybe. The hit version was this orchestral thing you're referring to.
yes.
A nameless, a studio orchestra that they called Sounds Orchestral. That was the hit. To me, you're right, that was the hit. The composer was Vince Guaraldi, the great jazz pianist from San Francisco, who wrote the score to Peanuts, the Peanuts stuff on TV. But he didn't have a hit on it. His version is interesting, a little more jazzy. It's got a jazz section that I don't think the Sounds Orchestral used.
Correct.
Sounds Orchestral was a British arranger who made up a name, Sounds Orchestral, and went into the studio. But to me, that's the version, and I've learned it since I did Shaggy. You may remember, I think, participated on that record. He transformed it too. Did a marvelous job. But when I have a little symphony show that I do once in a while when I can, and I do the Sounds Orchestral arrangement of that, and I learned, I had a guy write out all that piano stuff. I was able to, in my slow, watch it, and I can play all those licks now.
That's great.
No. Ding, ding, ding. Terrific.
I love it. And I think I noticed that on Vince's recordings, he did it in A flat. And he also did the Charlie Brown iconic thing in A flat. I said,
A flat.
Pardon?
You're right, A flat.
Yeah. I said, he must like the flats, I guess.
I don't know the answer to that, but it reminds me of something, a great story. I don't know if you've done Will Lee yet for your series.
No, I'd love to.
My long time, as you know, long bassist on Letterman from start to finish. But even before that, he was a top studio guy. And during the period, there was a period of time, I guess, in the 90s, where some records came out called TV tunes, versions of the great TV themes and stuff that you could buy on a vinyl record. This was when days of vinyl. You could get, whether it was the Flintstones theme or different themes to the classic shows. And when they could afford it, I think they used the originals, but otherwise they would cut their own. And Will got me a date one time after the show. Paul, can you come and do a session after the show at 7 p.m. for this guy? I said yes, and I'm there, and they said, we're doing the Charlie Brown theme. Here it is for the TV tunes. And oh my God, they've written it out. And they expect me to read it. Luckily, I knew it a little bit, but I just, and nobody would get, this kind of treatment in a studio. But I was on television, and a little bit, I could ask. I just said to the guy, they said, we're doing the Charlie Brown theme, and put out the music. And I said, taking advantage of the fact that I was a little known from Letterman, I said, do mind if can you just give me 5 minutes with the chart myself? And it was an unusual request, but he said, yeah, sure, guys, take a 5. And I just went to work with my pencil, writing in the ledger lines and whatever I had to do, and just figuring out the independence that you need. You got to keep that going. Then you're in A flat. But under pressure, I was able. So if you hear it, if you go like on YouTube, I think that's me playing that, me and Will, me under duress.
Me under duress. Fantastic. I've so much enjoyed this conversation. Just to wrap up, is it difficult in this music business currently to find a record label and promote your own recordings?
I have no idea how it's done. That, absolutely no idea. Some say, only the major artists can really make money these days with their recording work. And of course, and they make huge money, but otherwise no one makes money. It's all free. So I'm stymied. I don't know how it might work. That's the best I can do. I just don't know how people are making money, except we know that, somehow they charge exorbitant fees to go see them live and say, well, we have to do this because we're not making money from our records anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So
is it a challenge to gather your A team for the world's most dangerous band if you want to do a small tour?
Well, we did a tour, and Valerie Simpson came out with us as our special guest. And truthfully, I never had to tour, as opposed to pretty much all my friends. I started doing theater and then studio work and television. And I find that traveling is it doesn't agree with me. Everyone, people, the guys say, I love the bus. Are you crazy? No, I'd much rather get back on that bus and sleep in a bed, and then the next morning, 6 a.m., the sun, and you come out of the bus with your thing, your costume over to go into the motel. This is what you want? It didn't work for me. But there was certainly no, Jimmy Fallon asked us to reunite and do one night with him when Questlove, his band leader, was, in Hollywood, being huge. But it was not a problem to get everybody, including Will, who flew in from the south of France to do and other guys. Aaron Hike on saxophone flew from the Caribbean or something. We were dying to play together again, though, and it was a lot of fun.
I'm going to close with 2 quotes. The first one is from Eugene Levy, aka Johnny Rose, from the dream sequence in Schitt's Creek. After you finished the swing version of Silent Night, and Johnny Rose, referring to you, said, "He's worth every penny."
Funny.
And,
well, that was in their plot, of course, showing that they were so wealthy that they could afford the great Paul Shaffer, if you will, for their party. It was a Christmas party. But God bless them. I had to say, well, we've got to. So the point is that they had me at their Christmas party before they lost all their money. I said, but you got to at least tell people who I am. Oh, no, it'll just be great that you're there. Well, you got a lot more confidence in my stature. Tell the people who I am. And I think they ended up doing it.
The last quote is something you said during a 2009 CBS interview. "I think I've done it, I missed Elvis, I missed Sinatra, but otherwise I did pretty well." And
well, someone had asked,
yes.
Who did you miss? Who do you wish you had gotten to play for? And I got asked, still quite often. And that was my answer, wow. But I'm pretty much when I got to play for Aretha, that was huge for me, momentous. Because I used to say, wow, if I ever got to play with Aretha Franklin. But once I knocked her off and got to play for her a number of times, even produce her, doing Respect for the Blues Brothers sequel. Then I said, yeah, I pretty much did it. Sinatra and Elvis. I missed them, but otherwise did pretty well. That's what I meant.
Well, this has been fantastic, and I include myself in that group of envious musicians when we think about what you've accomplished and what you're still. By the way, like when we wrap up here, do you have a musical task to take care of?
Not today. No cast chomping at the bit today. But I make my own tourists sometimes, releasing with my beautiful assistant Olivia certain Instagram mini musicals. And sometimes, I got to flex my chops a little bit that way.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I hope to see you on the flip side.
It's been a gas. Your name is Monk. I don't think we have to say any more than that. Thank you, Monk. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Paul.